I'm Jason, 32 years old, and I built my software engineering career from scratch while watching my parents shower my younger sister Rebecca with endless support. Our relationship was already strained, but nothing prepared me for that family dinner where they dropped a bomb, pay off my sister's massive debt, or be disowned. After years of unequal treatment, this ultimatum forced me to make a decision that permanently altered our family dynamics. Before I share how I finally stood up to this manipulation, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe to see more stories about breaking free from toxic family patterns. Growing up in Lexington, a middle-class suburb just outside Boston, my childhood looked normal from the outside. My father worked as an accountant at a regional firm, and my mother taught third grade at the local elementary school. We weren't wealthy, but we weren't struggling either. Dad preached financial responsibility constantly. I heard save 20% of every dollar and never spend what you haven't earned so many times that these phrases became the soundtrack of my youth. These lessons applied strictly to me, but somehow different rules existed for my sister Rebecca, 4 years younger, and perpetually my parents' favorite. When I turned 16, Dad informed me that I needed to get a job to pay for my car insurance and gas money. It builds character, he explained while handing me the classified section of the newspaper. Meanwhile, on Rebecca's 16th birthday, she received a brand new Honda Civic with a red bow on top. "Your sister is more sensitive," Mom explained when I questioned the double standard. "She needs more support." This pattern continued throughout our lives. I worked 20 hours weekly at the local grocery store during high school while maintaining a 3.8 GPA. Rebecca quit her part-time job after 3 weeks because the manager was mean, and my parents nodded sympathetically. When college applications rolled around, I received a partial scholarship to Boston University, but had to cover the remaining tuition through student loans and working 30 hours weekly at a campus coffee shop and weekend tech support gigs. Rebecca attended the same university 3 years later, but my parents dipped into their retirement savings to fund her education fully. "Your sister isn't as academically gifted as you," Dad reasoned. "She needs to focus entirely on studies without the distraction of work." Despite this supposed academic disadvantage, Rebecca managed to maintain an active social life in a sorority while changing majors 3 times. After graduation, I secured an entry-level programming position at a software company. The salary wasn't impressive, but it offered valuable experience and growth potential. I lived with 2 roommates in a cramped apartment, ate ramen more often than I care to admit, and diligently paid down my student loans. Within 3 years, my dedication paid off with a promotion to mid-level developer, allowing me to move into my own small apartment. Rebecca's post-college trajectory looked considerably different. After graduating with a communications degree, she moved into a luxury apartment downtown that my parents subsidized while she found herself. Her finding process apparently required designer clothing, regular spa treatments, and weekend trips to New York City with friends. She cycled through entry-level positions at marketing firms, quitting whenever the work became too stressful or underappreciated her talents. Despite the obvious favoritism, I maintained contact with my family. Sunday dinners at my parents' house became a monthly tradition, though each visit inevitably included subtle digs about my modest lifestyle choices. Still, driving that old Toyota, Dad would ask, despite knowing I was prioritizing retirement savings over automotive status symbols. Mom would question why I hadn't found a nice girl to settle down with, ignoring that building my career left limited time for serious relationships. By my 30th birthday, I had advanced to senior software engineer at Rapid Tech Solutions, a respected company developing innovative healthcare applications. My salary had doubled since my first job. I contributed the maximum to my 401 Kelvin, maintained a healthy emergency fund, and had finally paid off my student loans. I lived in a comfortable 1-bedroom apartment in Cambridge, not extravagant but certainly pleasant. I took occasional vacations, enjoyed dining out weekly, and had developed a small but solid group of friends who shared my values. Rebecca, now 28, continued floating between jobs that never lasted more than 6 months. Her Instagram showcased expensive restaurants, designer purchases, and tropical vacations that mystified me, given her sporadic employment. Whenever I expressed concern to my parents about her spending habits, they defended her vehemently. She's networking for her career, Mom would insist. Those connections will pay off eventually. Dad would add, she's young. Let her enjoy life before responsibilities take over. Last spring, everything changed when I received a major promotion to technical director, overseeing a team of 15 developers and earning nearly double my previous salary. After years of 70-hour work weeks and continuous self-education, this recognition validated all my sacrifices. For once, I felt genuinely proud and wanted to share my achievement with my family despite our complicated relationship. I called my parents with the news, and to my surprise, they suggested hosting a special dinner to celebrate. This calls for champagne, Mom declared, which struck me as uncharacteristically supportive. Dad even offered to make reservations at Morton's Steakhouse, an extravagance he typically reserved for significant anniversaries. Their enthusiasm seemed suspicious, given their usual indifference toward my career milestones, but I pushed aside my skepticism, hoping that maybe finally they recognized my accomplishments. Little did I know that this celebratory dinner would become the catalyst for a family implosion that had been brewing for decades. The evening of my celebration dinner arrived, and I pulled up to Morton's 15 minutes early, dressed in my best suit. The restaurant's dark wood and leather interior exuded the kind of luxury I rarely indulged in, making the occasion feel genuinely special. When the host led me to our table, I found my parents already seated, both smiling broadly. Mom had gotten her hair freshly colored for the occasion, and Dad wore his special occasion tie with tiny golf clubs printed on navy silk. "There he is, our big executive," Dad announced as I approached, standing to give me an uncharacteristic hug. Mom kissed my cheek and squeezed my arm affectionately. "Technical director, not executive," I corrected gently, though secretly pleased by their warm reception. "But it's definitely a big step up." The waiter brought champagne that Dad had apparently ordered in advance, and we toasted my promotion. For the first 30 minutes, everything felt surprisingly normal and pleasant. Mom asked detailed questions about my new responsibilities, and Dad seemed genuinely interested in the company's healthcare software innovations. This unprecedented level of engagement in my career made me wonder if perhaps I had misjudged their capacity to change. "Rebecca should be here any minute," Mom mentioned casually, after we'd ordered appetizers. "She's running a bit late." I hadn't expected my sister to join us, but it made sense for a family celebration. The minutes ticked by. Appetizers came and went, and still no Rebecca. Just as we were about to order entrees, she finally appeared 45 minutes late, and looking visibly distressed. Her eyes were rimmed with red, her typically immaculate makeup slightly smudged. She gave me a quick, distracted hug before slipping into her seat. "Sorry I'm late," she mumbled, immediately reaching for the wine bottle. Traffic was terrible. The mood shifted palpably. Mom started asking Rebecca if she was okay, while Dad signaled the waiter for another bottle of wine. My celebration dinner suddenly felt like background scenery in a different play. We ordered our main courses, but the previous engaging conversation about my career had evaporated. Instead, my parents kept exchanging meaningful glances with each other and with Rebecca. Midway through our steaks, Dad cleared his throat dramatically. "Jason, we're obviously very proud of your promotion. Your hard work has really paid off." The compliment came with a "but" hovering invisibly at the end of the sentence. I braced myself. But Dad continued right on cue. "We have a family situation that we need to discuss while we're all together." Mom reached over to squeeze Rebecca's hand, who suddenly looked even more distressed, staring down at her barely touched filet mignon. "Rebecca has found herself in a bit of financial trouble." Dad stated, his tone shifting to the same one he used when discussing serious tax matters with clients. My sister sniffled dramatically on cue. "It's not a bit of trouble, Dad. Let's be honest with Jason." "What's going on?" I asked, though an uncomfortable suspicion was already forming. Dad took a deep breath. "Rebecca has accumulated some significant debt, about $50,000 all told." The figure hit me like a physical blow. $50,000 wasn't some debt. It was catastrophic financial mismanagement. How I managed to ask, setting down my fork as my appetite vanished. What followed was a 20-minute tearful explanation from Rebecca, occasionally supplemented by parental commentary. The debt consisted of maxed-out credit cards, 6 of them personal loans from 3 different lenders, 6 months of unpaid rent on her luxury apartment, and outstanding medical bills from elective cosmetic procedures. Throughout her explanation, Rebecca portrayed herself as a victim of circumstances beyond her control. "The interest rates are criminal," she sobbed, "and my landlord raised the rent without proper notice. Then I needed those procedures for a medical condition, but insurance wouldn't cover them because they considered them cosmetic. The medical condition turned out to be lip fillers and Botox that she claimed were necessary for networking in her industry. The unpaid rent coincided with 3 international vacations she had taken over the past year, documented extensively on her Instagram. The credit card debt stemmed largely from designer clothing purchases and regular spa treatments that were apparently also career investments." Throughout Rebecca's explanation, my parents nodded sympathetically, occasionally adding comments like, "The job market is so much harder for her generation, and these credit card companies prey on young people." Not once did they acknowledge the obvious pattern of irresponsibility that had created this situation. As Rebecca concluded her sob story, an uncomfortable silence fell over the table. I noticed our waiter hovering awkwardly nearby, clearly sensing the tension and unsure whether to approach with dessert menus. The realization hit me with startling clarity. This dinner had never been about celebrating my promotion. It had been orchestrated as an intervention about Rebecca's financial disaster. "I'm sorry you're in this situation," I finally said to Rebecca, choosing my words carefully. "That sounds really stressful." My diplomatic response was met with more loaded glances between my family members. Mom dabbed at her eyes with her napkin, while Dad straightened his silverware unnecessarily. "The thing is, Jason," Dad began, his voice taking on the reasonable tone he used when closing deals with your new position, "you're in a unique position to help." And there it was, the real purpose of our gathering. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. "We thought as a family we could come together to resolve this situation," Mom interjected smoothly. "You're doing so well now, and family supports each other through difficult times." The carefully choreographed nature of this ambush became increasingly apparent. The celebration dinner, the champagne toast, the excessive interest in my promotion, all calculated preliminaries to soften me up for the real agenda. "You want me to pay off Rebecca's debt," I stated flatly. "Not all at once necessarily," Dad quickly clarified, as if the timeline rather than the principle was my primary concern. "But you could take over the payments. With your new salary, it would hardly impact your lifestyle." Rebecca finally looked up from her plate, eyes wide with rehearsed gratitude. "I would pay you back eventually, Jason, once I get established in my career." The same career she had been getting established in for the past 6 years while cycling through jobs she quit whenever they required actual effort. The same career that somehow necessitated international vacations and luxury apartments. I sat in stunned silence as the waiter finally approached with dessert menus, which we all declined. As Dad requested the check, making sure to mention my promotion to the waiter as if to remind me of my supposed financial obligation, I realized this dinner represented a pattern that had persisted throughout my life. My achievements were acknowledged only when they could be leveraged to benefit Rebecca. The evening ended with no resolution. I neither agreed nor refused their implied request, instead stating that I needed time to think about the situation. As we parted in the parking lot, Mom hugged me tightly and whispered, "We're counting on you to do the right thing, Jason. Family first, always." Driving home that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that a threshold had been crossed. The blatant manipulation tactic disguised as a celebration dinner had illuminated decades of family dynamics with painful clarity. What had been subtle favoritism throughout our childhood had evolved into an explicit expectation that my success existed primarily to bail out my sister's failures. Little did I know that this dinner was merely the opening salvo in an escalating campaign of emotional manipulation that would force me to make the most difficult decision of my life. The morning after our celebration dinner, my phone lit up with a text from Mom. "Your father and I are so proud of you. We know you'll make the right decision about helping your sister." This message set the tone for what would become a relentless campaign over the following week. By Monday evening, Dad called to just check in and casually mentioned that Rebecca's landlord was threatening eviction. She could be homeless by the end of the month, he emphasized, his voice grave with concern that somehow hadn't manifested during the years he funded her luxury lifestyle. As her brother, I know you wouldn't want that on your conscience. Tuesday brought a tearful call from Mom, who abandoned the subtle approach entirely. Family takes care of family, Jason. Your father and I sacrificed everything for you children. Is it too much to ask that you step up when Rebecca needs help? The irony of this statement, given the vastly different levels of sacrifice they had made for each of us, apparently escaped her completely. On Wednesday, Rebecca herself joined the offensive with a series of manipulative text messages that alternated between desperate pleas and surprising entitlement. I don't know what I'll do if I get evicted. I have nowhere to go. The credit card companies are harassing me daily. I saw the most amazing opportunity for a marketing certification that would totally turn my career around, but I can't even consider it with all this debt hanging over me. If you help me now, I promise I'll be more responsible. This was a wake-up call. That last message arrived shortly before she posted Instagram stories, showcasing a new designer handbag at a rooftop bar, cocktail in hand. Curious about this disconnect, I began monitoring her social media more carefully. While pleading financial devastation to me, she continued posting about weekend brunches, shopping hauls, and plans for an upcoming trip to Miami. Either she was financing these activities through even more debt, or the crisis wasn't quite as dire as my family portrayed. Thursday evening, I met my closest friend Carlos for drinks and finally unburdened myself about the situation. Carlos listened attentively, his expression growing increasingly alarmed as I detailed the week's events. Jason, this isn't normal family support, he said firmly after I finished. This is textbook emotional manipulation. They're using your sense of obligation and guilt to make you responsible for your sister's choices. But what if she really does end up homeless? I asked, voicing the fear that had kept me awake at night despite my resentment. Has she ever faced real consequences before? Carlos countered. Or have your parents always swooped in to save her? The question struck a nerve. Throughout her life, Rebecca had been insulated from the natural consequences of her actions. Poor grades were blamed on teachers. Job losses were attributed to unfair bosses. Financial irresponsibility was reframed as bad luck or the economy. That night, I decided to propose a more reasonable alternative to simply writing a blank check. I drafted a careful email suggesting that instead of paying off her debt directly, I could help Rebecca develop a realistic budget and debt repayment plan. I offered to connect her with a financial advisor friend who specialized in debt management, and even suggested reviewing her resume to help her find more stable employment. The response was swift and unified in its dismissal. Dad called within an hour of my sending the email. That's not real help, Jason, he stated coldly. Rebecca needs immediate financial intervention, not lectures about budgeting. If you were truly successful, $50,000 wouldn't be such a big deal to you. Mom followed up with a text. Your sister is too fragile for financial tough love right now. She needs our support, not judgment. Rebecca didn't respond at all, though she posted a cryptic social media update about disappointing people who should have your back. By Friday, I discovered something that transformed my uneasiness into genuine anger. During a brief conversation with my Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, she let slip a revealing detail. It's good of you to help Rebecca with her debt like your parents promised. What do you mean, like they promised? I asked, my stomach tightening. Aunt Susan paused, clearly realizing she had said something she shouldn't have. Oh, I thought. Your mom mentioned a few weeks ago that they had it all worked out, that with your promotion you'd be covering Rebecca's financial troubles. This revelation hit me like a bucket of cold water. Weeks ago, before my celebration dinner. Before I had even been approached about the debt. My parents had already promised Rebecca and apparently other family members that I would bail her out without even consulting me. The dinner had been theater, an elaborate performance designed to ease me into an obligation they had already committed me to. The manipulation reached its peak on Sunday evening with a phone call from Dad that abandoned all pretense of subtlety. Your mother and I have been patient, Jason, but we need your decision about Rebecca's situation immediately, he stated without even a greeting when I answered. I'm still considering the options, I replied, working to keep my voice neutral despite my growing resentment. There are no options here, Dad snapped. Either you help your sister, or you're choosing to abandon your family when we need you. That's not fair, I protested. I offered a reasonable alternative. Listen carefully, Dad interrupted his voice, taking on a threatening edge I'd never heard before. Your mother and I have supported you throughout your life. We've been there for every milestone. If you refuse to help Rebecca now when you have the means, then perhaps you don't need family in your life anymore. The threat hung in the air between us. For the first time, my father had explicitly stated what had been implied all week: help Rebecca financially, or be cut off from the family. Are you threatening to disown me if I don't pay my sister's debt? I asked, wanting the ultimatum stated plainly. I'm saying that family works both ways, Jason. If you turn your back on us now, don't expect us to be there for you in the future. After ending the call, I sat in stunned silence in my apartment. The people who should love me unconditionally had just placed a $50,000 price tag on our relationship. The subtle manipulation of my childhood had evolved into explicit emotional blackmail. The next morning, I received a text from Mom. Your father and I are arranging a family meeting this Saturday at 2 p.m. We expect you to bring your checkbook and a better attitude about family responsibility. As the week progressed, I fluctuated between rage, hurt, and doubt. Had I misunderstood my family's intentions? Was I being selfish by protecting my financial security? The lifelong conditioning to prioritize Rebecca's needs above my own ran deep, making objective assessment difficult. But one thing had become crystal clear: this situation was no longer just about money. It was about a fundamental imbalance in how love and support were distributed in my family. It was about whether I would continue accepting treatment as a second-class family member whose primary value lay in what I could provide materially. Saturday's family meeting loomed like a storm on the horizon, forcing me toward a decision that would either perpetuate this destructive pattern or break it once and for all. Saturday arrived with a sense of inevitability. As I drove to my parents' suburban home, scenarios played through my mind like rehearsals for a confrontation I never wanted but could no longer avoid. The familiar street looked the same as always: neat lawns, trimmed hedges, and the American flag hanging from my parents' porch, but everything felt fundamentally different. My father's silver Lexus and mother's blue Volvo sat in the driveway along with Rebecca's red BMW. A 26th birthday present from my parents 3 years ago when she was between jobs. The irony of discussing her financial crisis while she drove a luxury vehicle my parents had gifted her wasn't lost on me. Mom answered the door with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. We're in the living room, she said by way of greeting, leading me through the familiar hallway lined with family photos. I noticed not for the first time how Rebecca dominated these displays. Her graduations, dance recitals, and vacations prominently featured while my achievements occupied minimal space. In the living room, Dad sat stiffly in his leather recliner, while Rebecca perched on the sofa. I immediately noticed her outfit, a designer blouse I recognized from her recent social media posts, still with the price tag partially visible as it peeked from the collar. Apparently, her financial distress hadn't impacted her shopping habits. Jason, Dad nodded formally. Have a seat. I sat across from Rebecca, who avoided eye contact, instead studying her manicured nails with exaggerated interest. The coffee table between us had been cleared except for a single item, a checkbook with what appeared to be a bank draft already filled out. Dad cleared his throat dramatically. We've asked you here today to resolve the situation with Rebecca's debt once and for all. Your mother and I have been more than patient, giving you time to consider your responsibility. My responsibility? I repeated the word, tasting bitter. Yes, your responsibility. Dad continued, his tone hardening. Family members support each other. Your mother and I supported you throughout your education. I worked 30 hours a week and took out loans to pay for college. I interrupted, unable to let this revisionist history stand. We gave you a home food guidance, Mom interjected smoothly. We made you the successful man you are today. Rebecca finally looked up, her expression a practiced blend of vulnerability and hope. I know I've made mistakes, Jason, but I'm really trying to turn things around. Dad leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. We've prepared everything to make this simple. He gestured to the check on the table. We've already filled out the amount. You just need to sign it." I reached for the check, turning it to face me. There it was in black and white, my name as the payer, $50,000 written out in my father's precise handwriting, made payable to Rebecca. They hadn't even had the decency to make it out to the creditors directly, which might have ensured the money actually addressed the debt. "This is presumptuous," I stated, my voice calmer than I felt. "It's efficient," Dad corrected. "We're resolving a family crisis." Mom moved to sit beside Rebecca, placing an arm around her shoulders. "Your sister is suffering, Jason. Her credit is ruined. She can't sleep from the stress. As her brother, you have an obligation to help when you have the means." "And if I don't sign this check?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Dad's expression hardened. "Then you're making a choice about what family means to you." Or rather, Mom added, her voice gentle but her words razor sharp, "what family doesn't mean to you." Rebecca produced tears on cue, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. I never thought my own brother would let me become homeless. The theatrics were so transparent that under different circumstances it might have been comical. Instead, it sent a wave of profound sadness through me. This coordinated performance revealed how my family truly saw me, not as a person with valid boundaries and perspectives, but as a resource to be manipulated and extracted from. "I need some air," I said, standing abruptly and walking to the backyard through the sliding glass doors. The yard where I had played as a child looked smaller now. The old oak tree where Dad had built me a treehouse still stood, though the treehouse itself had been dismantled years ago to make room for Mom's garden. I remembered asking Dad why it needed to be removed when there was plenty of space elsewhere for plants. "Your mother needs that spot for her tomatoes," he'd explained. "Sometimes we make sacrifices for people we love." Even then, my needs had been secondary. Through the glass, I could see my family having an intense discussion, occasionally glancing my way. The tableau perfectly encapsulated our dynamics, them united me outside looking in. As I stood there, memories flooded back. Rebecca crashing my car in high school with no consequences, while I worked extra shifts to pay for repairs. My parents missing my college graduation because Rebecca had a minor cold. The time I needed a small loan to cover a security deposit on my first apartment, and Dad lectured me about financial responsibility instead. Each memory carried the same message: Rebecca's needs were paramount, while mine were inconveniences. And now they expected me to sacrifice my financial security to enable her continued irresponsibility. The sliding door opened and Mom stepped out. "Jason, we're waiting." "This isn't a difficult decision unless you're making it one." "Actually, it is difficult," I replied. "You're asking me to give Rebecca $50,000 with no guarantees she'll use it responsibly or change her behavior. She's family." Mom stated as if this single fact nullified all reasonable concerns. "Yes, she is, which is why enabling her destructive patterns isn't actually helping her." Mom's expression hardened. "I never raised you to be so selfish." "Is it selfish to want my sister to learn financial responsibility? Is it selfish to expect my parents to love me without conditions?" "No one is putting conditions on our love," Mom protested, though the evidence suggested otherwise. "Aren't you, Dad literally threatened to cut me off if I don't pay Rebecca's debt?" "That's not what he meant." "It's exactly what he meant," I interrupted. "And it's exactly what you both have communicated all week." Mom sighed dramatically. "I can see you're determined to make this difficult. Come back inside when you're ready to be reasonable." She returned to the house, leaving me alone with my thoughts once more. The decision before me was about much more than money. It represented a crossroads in how I would allow myself to be treated for the rest of my life. If I signed that check, I would be accepting my designated role as the family ATM, setting a precedent for future financial demands. Rebecca would learn that irresponsibility carried no real consequences, and my parents would have confirmation that emotional manipulation worked on me. Yet refusing meant potentially losing my family. Despite our dysfunctional dynamics, the thought created a hollow feeling in my chest. They were still my parents. Rebecca was still my sister. Could I really walk away from those bonds? I spent 3 hours in that backyard weighing options, examining past patterns, and contemplating futures. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lawn. Eventually, Dad came out, his patience visibly exhausted. "We can't sit here all night, Jason. It's time to make a decision." Looking at my father's stern expression, I realized something crucial: this pattern would never end unless I ended it. Today it was $50,000 for Rebecca's debt. Next year it might be a down payment for a house she couldn't afford, or bailout money for another financial crisis. I followed him inside, where Mom and Rebecca waited expectantly. The check still lay on the coffee table, a physical manifestation of the choice before me. "I've made my decision," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions beneath. "But before I tell you what it is, I need you all to understand exactly what you're asking and what it means." I took my seat facing my family, acutely aware that this moment would permanently alter our relationship regardless of my decision. The living room felt charged with tension as 3 pairs of eyes fixed on me expectantly. "Before I give you my answer," I began deliberately, "I think we should be completely clear about the situation." I reached into my messenger bag and removed a blue folder I had prepared that morning just in case. "I've compiled some information I'd like to share first." Dad's eyebrows furrowed. "We don't need a presentation, Jason. We need your decision about helping your sister." "Consider this context for my decision," I replied calmly, opening the folder. "First, let's review Rebecca's financial history." I removed a printed timeline I had created, placing it on the coffee table beside the check. "In the past 5 years, you've provided Rebecca with approximately $120,000 in direct financial support." I listed the itemized expenses: the BMW rent subsidies, vacation funds, and multiple emergency cash infusions. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably on the sofa. "That's private family business." "Yes, it is family business," I agreed. "Which is exactly why we should discuss it openly as a family, rather than pretending this current crisis exists in isolation." Next, I pulled out screenshots of Rebecca's social media posts from the past month, since her debt crisis had supposedly reached critical levels. Images of champagne brunches, shopping sprees, and a weekend spa retreat filled the pages. "These were all posted after you claimed to be on the brink of financial collapse," I noted, laying them beside the timeline. "Most are tagged with luxury brands or high-end venues." Mom's face flushed. "Social media isn't real life, Jason. She has to maintain appearances for her career networking." Which brings me to my next point. I removed a spreadsheet detailing Rebecca's employment history. 6 jobs in 5 years, none lasting longer than 8 months, with increasingly lengthy gaps between positions. This pattern doesn't suggest someone committed to building a stable career that would ever allow repayment of significant debts. Dad's expression darkened. "This feels like character assassination rather than family support." "I'm simply establishing facts." Before making a $50,000 decision, I countered evenly. "Just as you would advise any client to do before making a major financial commitment." Finally, I placed a document outlining the debt management plan I had researched. This is what actual help would look like. A structured approach including financial counseling, career coaching, a reasonable budget that Rebecca would need to follow, and a gradual repayment plan that would teach responsibility while addressing the immediate crisis. I closed the folder and looked directly at my family. "I won't be signing this check today. Not because I don't care about Rebecca, but because giving her $50,000 without addressing the underlying issues would be enabling destructive behavior, not helping her." The silence that followed was deafening. Rebecca's face crumpled into tears, real ones this time, not the performative drops she had produced earlier. Mom's expression hardened into something I barely recognized. Dad's complexion turned an alarming shade of red. "So your answer is no?" Dad finally stated, his voice dangerously quiet. "My answer is that I'm offering real help instead of a blank check," I clarified. "I'll connect Rebecca with professional financial counseling. I'll help her find stable employment using my industry contacts. I'll even contribute to a structured debt repayment plan once she demonstrates commitment to changing her spending habits." Rebecca suddenly stood up. "I don't need your judgment and conditions. Either help me or don't, but spare me the lecture." "That's exactly the problem," I responded, maintaining my calm. "You view financial responsibility as a lecture rather than a necessary life skill, and Mom and Dad have reinforced that view by constantly shielding you from consequences." Dad slammed his hand on the armrest of his chair. Enough. Your sister needs help now, not your condescending financial theories. If you won't provide that help unconditionally, then I question whether you understand what family truly means. I understand exactly what family should mean, I replied. Mutual respect, honest communication, and supporting each other's growth, not enabling self-destruction. Mom's voice cut through the tension, cold and deliberate. Jason, this is your final opportunity. Either sign that check and remain part of this family, or refuse and accept the consequences of that choice. The ultimatum hung in the air between us, explicit and unmistakable. The moment had arrived, the threshold I had been approaching my entire life without realizing it. I won't sign it, I stated firmly. Not under threat, not under emotional manipulation, and certainly not when it would ultimately harm Rebecca more than help her. Dad stood up, pointing toward the door. Then I suggest you leave. When you're ready to be a real member of this family, you can contact us. The finality in his voice made my chest tighten, but I remained outwardly composed as I gathered my documents and stood. Rebecca wouldn't look at me, her shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed equal parts anger and disappointment. Mom stared straight ahead, her expression unreadable. Before I go, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, you should know that this works both ways. You've chosen to cut me off for refusing to meet your financial demands. But I'm choosing to step away from this toxic dynamic that's damaged all of us for years. Dad's expression registered surprise. He clearly hadn't expected me to embrace the separation rather than beg for reconciliation. Until you can respect my boundaries and acknowledge the manipulation that's defined our relationship, I'll be the one cutting contact, I continued. I love you all, but I won't participate in this unhealthy pattern anymore. With those words, I walked toward the front door, half expecting someone to call me back. No one did. The sound of the door closing behind me echoed with a strange finality, as if physically separating me from not just my family's home but the role I had played in their lives. In my car parked at the curb, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. My hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel as a complex mixture of grief, relief, and uncertainty washed over me. I had just walked away from my family, perhaps temporarily, perhaps permanently. The vibration of my phone interrupted my thoughts. A text from Rebecca. I hope you're happy now that you've destroyed this family. Followed immediately by one from Mom. Your father and I are deeply disappointed in the selfish man you've become. Neither message expressed concern for my feelings or acknowledged the validity of my perspective. Even in this moment of family rupture, their focus remained entirely on how my decision affected them, with no consideration for the painful position their ultimatum had put me in. As I drove away from my childhood home, the check unsigned and my boundaries intact, I felt simultaneously hollow and unburdened. I had called their bluff, refusing to capitulate to emotional blackmail. But the cost of that stance, potentially permanent estrangement from my family, created an ache that no principled stand could entirely soothe. What I didn't yet understand was that this painful rupture would ultimately lead to healing I couldn't have imagined, both for me and unexpectedly for my family as well. The first week after the confrontation passed in a surreal haze. I moved mechanically through my daily routines, working, eating, sleeping, while my mind continuously replayed the scene at my parents' house. During meetings at work, I would suddenly hear my father's dismissive tone or see my mother's cold expression, momentarily losing track of discussions about software development timelines. My phone became both a source of anxiety and disappointment. Each notification triggered a spike of adrenaline, wondering if it might be a conciliatory message from my family. Instead, I received a barrage of texts and calls from extended relatives, each apparently briefed on a heavily edited version of events. Aunt Susan called first, her voice tight with disapproval. Jason, I don't understand how you could abandon your sister in her time of need. Your parents are devastated. Uncle Mike left a voicemail. Your father tells me you've turned your back on the family. That's not how we raised you kids to behave. Cousin Jennifer texted, Rebecca is heartbroken. How could you be so cruel? Not one family member had heard my side of the story. In the narrative circulating through the family grapevine, I had callously refused to help my struggling sister, despite having ample means, then cruelly cut contact with my loving parents when they expressed disappointment in my cruelty. Selfishness. The isolation felt overwhelming at times. Family had always been a complicated part of my life, but its complete absence created a vacuum I wasn't prepared for. Holidays, birthdays, and family traditions, however flawed, had provided structure and connection. Now those landmarks stretched before me as uncharted territory. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Rebecca's financial crisis apparently escalated. My cousin Thomas mentioned during a brief, uncomfortable phone call that she had indeed received an eviction notice. Rather than acknowledging any responsibility for her situation, she reportedly blamed me entirely. If Jason hadn't been so selfish, none of this would be happening. According to Thomas, my parents had dipped further into their retirement savings to cover Rebecca's most pressing debts, but couldn't manage the entire amount. For the first time in her adult life, Rebecca faced genuine financial consequences with only partial protection from our parents. A month into the estrangement, I received an unexpected email from my Uncle Robert, my father's brother, who had always been somewhat distanced from family dynamics due to living on the opposite coast. "Jason," he wrote, "I've heard snippets about the situation with Rebecca and your parents. Knowing your father since childhood, I suspect there's more to this story than what's circulating. If you want someone to listen without judgment, I'm available." His message arrived precisely when my resolve was weakening. That evening I called him and spent 2 hours detailing the entire history, not just the recent ultimatum, but the lifelong pattern of favoritism, emotional manipulation, and double standards. Uncle Robert listened without interruption, then sighed heavily. "This doesn't surprise me as much as it should. Your grandfather treated your father and me very similarly. I was always the one who couldn't do anything right while your dad was the golden child. It seems he's unconsciously recreated that dynamic with you and Rebecca." "So this is generational?" I asked, finding strange comfort in this broader context. "Unfortunately, yes. And it won't change unless someone breaks the pattern," he replied. "Which is exactly what you've done, as painful as it is." Uncle Robert's validation provided crucial support during the most difficult period. He began calling weekly, providing updates about the family situation, while offering perspective untainted by my parents' narrative. Through him, I learned that Rebecca had eventually moved into a much smaller apartment that aligned with her actual income. My parents had covered some of her debt, but insisted she take responsibility for the remainder, a previously unimaginable development. She had reluctantly accepted a stable administrative position at a local company, abandoning her vague aspirations of becoming a brand influencer. Meanwhile, I focused on strengthening connections with friends who had become my chosen family. Carlos and his wife invited me for Sunday dinners. My colleague Melissa included me in her family's Thanksgiving celebration. My neighbor David and I established a weekly basketball game that provided both exercise and companionship. Professionally, I channeled my emotional energy into work, leading my team through a major product launch that earned recognition throughout the company. The structure and clear metrics of my job provided refuge from the messy, subjective nature of family conflict. 6 months into the estrangement, Uncle Robert called with surprising news. "Rebecca has started credit counseling," he reported. "Apparently living within her means for the first time has been eye-opening. She's working with a financial advisor to establish a repayment plan for her remaining debt." This development stirred complicated emotions. I felt vindicated that my assessment had been correct. Rebecca needed financial guidance and boundaries, not a blank check. Yet I also experienced genuine happiness that she was potentially breaking her own destructive patterns. Despite everything, I wanted her to thrive. Around the 8-month mark, I encountered my mother unexpectedly at the grocery store. The produce section became the setting for our first interaction since the confrontation. Her appearance shocked me. She looked older, more tired than I remembered. "Jason," she acknowledged stiffly, clutching a bunch of kale like a shield. "Mom," I replied, my heart racing, despite my outward calm. "How are you?" "Managing," she answered curtly. After an awkward pause, she added, "Rebecca got a promotion at work. She's doing well." "I'm glad to hear that," I said sincerely. Mom hesitated, then offered, "Your father's blood pressure has been high. The doctor increased his medication. The information carried multiple messages concern about Dad's health, an implicit suggestion that family stress had contributed to his condition, and perhaps a subtle olive branch in sharing personal information. "I'm sorry to hear that," I responded. "Please tell him I hope he feels better soon." She nodded, then pushed her cart forward without further conversation. The brief exchange left me destabilized for days afterward, both yearning for reconciliation and determined to maintain the boundaries that had proven necessary. As the 1-year mark of our estrangement approached, I received an unexpected letter in the mail, actual paper correspondence handwritten on floral stationery. It was from Rebecca. "Jason," she wrote, "the past year has been the most difficult and also the most educational of my life. For the first time, I've had to face consequences without rescue. It's been humbling and honestly embarrassing to realize how dependent I've been on Mom and Dad, and how entitled I've become about financial support." Her letter continued, acknowledging how our parents' different treatment had shaped both our perspectives. "They set you up to be responsible and me to be dependent. I'm only now understanding how unfair that was to both of us in different ways." She closed with a tentative request. "If you're willing, I'd like to meet for coffee sometime. No demands, no expectations, just a conversation between siblings who might understand each other better now." The letter sat on my kitchen counter for a week while I processed my response. Part of me feared a trap, another orchestrated attempt at manipulation with my parents waiting in the wings. But the tone felt genuinely different from anything Rebecca had communicated before, with a self-awareness previously absent. Eventually, I texted her to suggest meeting at a neutral coffee shop halfway between our apartments. Her response came immediately: "Thank you. That means more than you know." As I prepared for this tentative reconnection, I reflected on the year of separation from my family. The experience had been painful but clarifying, like setting a broken bone so it could heal properly. I had discovered my own resilience, built meaningful connections outside my family of origin, and established boundaries that protected my well-being. What remained to be seen was whether those boundaries could coexist with renewed family relationships, or whether the price of maintaining contact would always be sacrificing my autonomy and self-respect. Exactly 1 year and 2 months after walking out of my parents' house, I sat in a quiet corner of riverfront coffee waiting for Rebecca. The nervous energy coursing through me seemed disproportionate to meeting someone I'd known my entire life, yet this felt like encountering a stranger, or perhaps meeting the authentic version of my sister for the first time. When she entered, I almost didn't recognize her. Gone were the designer clothes and elaborate hairstyle that had been her trademark. Instead, she wore simple jeans, a sweater, and minimal makeup. She spotted me and approached with visible hesitation. "Jason," she said softly, sliding into the chair across from me. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "Your letter was unexpected," I acknowledged, studying her face for signs of the entitled sister I remembered. "A lot has changed," she replied, fidgeting with her coffee cup. "Mostly me, I think." Over the next 2 hours, Rebecca shared her journey since our family implosion. After my parents could only partially bail her out, she had faced actual consequences: downsizing to an apartment she could afford, taking a stable but unglamorous job, and working with a credit counselor to address her remaining debt. "The first few months I blamed you entirely," she admitted candidly. "It was easier than facing my own responsibility. But my credit counselor didn't let me get away with that narrative. She kept asking pointed questions about my spending choices that I couldn't deflect." What followed, according to Rebecca, was a painful period of self-reflection. I started seeing how Mom and Dad treated us differently our whole lives. They pushed you to be independent, while treating me like I was incapable of managing on my own. Eventually, I believed it too. Her most significant insight came 6 months into her financial recovery. I realized I'd been using shopping and appearances to feel valuable because I never developed actual skills or independence. When I had to start living within my means, I discovered I didn't even know who I was without all the external validation. As Rebecca spoke, I recognized genuine change in her perspective. This wasn't a performance designed to manipulate me into financial support. This was a person engaged in authentic self-examination. "What about Mom and Dad?" I finally asked. Have they had similar realizations? Rebecca's expression clouded. They're evolving, slowly. Dad had a minor health scare that forced him to consider retirement planning more seriously. Having to help with my debt compromised their financial security in ways they hadn't anticipated. Mom mentioned his blood pressure when I ran into her, I noted. That was just the beginning, Rebecca explained. His doctor had a serious conversation with them about stress reduction. It sparked some reflection about family dynamics, though they're still struggling to acknowledge their role in creating unhealthy patterns. According to Rebecca, our parents had tentatively expressed interest in reconciliation about 3 months ago, but I told them they needed to respect your boundaries if they wanted any chance at rebuilding a relationship, that it couldn't be conditional on you conforming to their expectations. Her advocacy on my behalf touched me deeply. That couldn't have been an easy conversation. It wasn't, she admitted, but I owe you that and more. Your refusal to enable me was ultimately the best thing anyone's done for me, even though I hated you for it at the time. We parted with a tentative plan to meet again the following month. No promises of instant family harmony, just small steps toward a potentially healthier relationship. 2 weeks later, I received a formal-looking letter from my parents. Inside was a brief note from my father. We've been doing some difficult reflection on our family patterns. If you're willing, we'd like to meet to discuss rebuilding our relationship on more equitable terms. Accompanying his note was a check for $5,000, a fraction of what they had demanded I pay for Rebecca's debt, with first repayment for college expenses written in the memo line. The symbolic gesture spoke volumes about their evolving understanding. I arranged to meet them at a restaurant, rather than their home maintaining neutral territory. The conversation was awkward, stilted, and occasionally tense, but fundamentally different from our interactions before the estrangement. We've realized we created different rules and expectations for you, and Rebecca Mom acknowledged, her voice uncharacteristically humble. It wasn't fair to either of you. Dad struggled more with direct accountability, but managed to admit, the ultimatum we gave you was wrong. Family relationships shouldn't have financial conditions attached. They didn't transform overnight into perfectly self-aware parents. Old patterns emerged periodically during our conversation, attempts to subtly control the narrative, moments of defensiveness, occasional martyrdom. But there was also genuine effort to listen, rather than simply waiting for their turn to speak. We established cautious terms for moving forward: monthly dinners, initially with explicit agreement that financial matters would not be discussed without prior consent from everyone involved. I made it clear that any return to manipulative patterns would result in me immediately leaving and reassessing contact. Over the following months, our family tentatively rebuilt connections on more solid foundations. Rebecca continued her growth, eventually earning a significant promotion based on genuine merit rather than appearance or connections. She established a structured plan to repay our parents a portion of what they had contributed to her debt crisis, insisting on this responsibility despite their initial reluctance. My parents gradually adjusted to our new dynamic, though not without occasional lapses into old habits. When these occurred, I calmly enforced my boundaries, sometimes leaving family gatherings early or taking breaks from contact. Each time the periods of dysfunction grew shorter as they recognized the connection between their behavior and consequences. The most significant change occurred within me. I no longer measured my worth through my family's approval or acceptance. The year of separation had forced me to develop deeper self-reliance and to build meaningful connections based on mutual respect rather than obligation. I had discovered that family could be chosen as well as inherited, and that healthy relationships required boundaries regardless of blood ties. My experience also transformed how I approached other relationships. I became more attuned to manipulation tactics and quicker to address them directly. I learned to distinguish between genuine requests for help and attempts to exploit my resources or goodwill. Most importantly, I recognized that true support sometimes means refusing to enable destructive patterns, even when that refusal causes temporary pain. Today, 3 years after that fateful ultimatum, my family relationships bear little resemblance to their former dysfunction. We interact with authentic care, tempered by healthy boundaries. Rebecca and I have developed a genuine friendship based on mutual respect rather than resentment. My parents have gradually accepted that conditional love isn't love at all, but a transaction that diminishes everyone involved. The $50,000 I refused to pay became the most valuable investment I never made, an investment in breaking generational patterns of manipulation and enabling. By calling their bluff when they threatened to cut me off, I catalyzed growth that money could never have purchased. If you're facing similar family dynamics or financial ultimatums disguised as love, remember that real support means helping people grow, not enabling their dysfunction. Sometimes the most loving choice is establishing firm boundaries even when that means walking away temporarily. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision between family expectations and your own well-being? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to see more content about navigating complicated family dynamics. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, healthy relationships are built on respect, not obligation or manipulation.